Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ayşe Süberker. It's a move that could seriously jeopardize the world's fight against terrorism. That is according to the Turkish government, which criticized a recent decision by Interpol to remove red notices for 144 terrorists. On that list are PKK terrorists and their affiliates, some of whom were directly involved in the 2016 attack on Ankara that killed 36 people. One of the highest profile criminals who was removed from the red notice list is Salih Müslim. He is the former head of the PYD, the Syrian affiliate of the PKK terror group. Turkey also sharply criticized Interpol for not issuing red notice warrants for FETÖ terrorists. Many fled Turkey to Europe after the failed 2016 coup. The criticism came after a bi-monthly meeting of Turkey's top security body in late July. Turkey has for years been pushing other countries to cooperate in arresting PKK and FETÖ terrorists who have been traveling freely and organizing hostile activities against the Turkish state. And joining me now is Ömer Özkızılcık, who is a security analyst at SETA, based in Ankara, and Uğur Yasin Asal, who is an assistant professor at Istanbul Commerce University. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you here. So Interpol recently cancelled a red notice for former co-chair of the PKK affiliate, PYD Salih Müslim, along with 144 suspects who are accused of orchestrating deadly attack in Ankara in 2016. So, Uğur, do you think cancelling these red notices will strike a blow to the fight against international terrorism, as Turkey claims?
Yes, absolutely. This was also a result of a National Security Council, and Turkey declared that the efforts of the Interpol hurts the combating international terrorism, not just by nationally, but also regional efforts such as YPG and such terrorist affiliations. This is why this is also another discussion issue between international law and national interest. This is why the claims of Turkey and become more honest in international politics is so right, and this is why the Interpol and such organizations needs to balance their interior architecture, being honestly and sound judgments, and become more effective and functional one.
Yeah, because Turkey fights terrorism on different front lines. So,
Yes.
Ömer, Interpol has also rejected Turkey's request for 352 people suspected of being FETÖ members. And Turkey clearly says these people are criminals, they should be facing trial in Turkey. So, tell me why Interpol would reject this request.
So actually, I don't think that the Interpol decision is a root cause itself, but it's only a symptom of something else. And this something else is important in regards to international fight against terrorism. So when it comes to terrorist organizations like ISIS or Al-Qaeda or the former Al-Nusra Front, then the entire international world and system seem to be on the same line. But when it comes to local terrorist organizations who do not harm, for example, Western states, but only attacked and killed Turkish citizens, then we see here a double standard. And this systematic different approach in the West in regards to radical jihadi terrorist organizations and, for example, Kurdish Marxist terrorist organizations is the reason behind this decision of Interpol. So if the terrorist is killing a German citizen, then Interpol is acting here clearly. But if the terrorist is responsible for the killing of a Turkish citizen or Afghani citizen or Syrian citizen, then Interpol has here double standards. And not only Interpol, but other institutions as well. And I think here the decision-making part is not Interpol itself, but the Western Hemisphere.
So, Uğur, tell me about this PKK YPG terrorist, Şahin Ferhat Abdi, also Şahin Cilo, if I'm not mistaken, who's on Interpol's red notice and one of the most wanted men in Turkey. But he has been seen signing an agreement with officials at UN headquarters in Geneva, and also he's been seen talking to US generals in northern Syria. So is that a double standard, that the organization doesn't take Turkey's security concerns urgently?
Sure. And we see this period not now, and before this process, it already gained an momentum become the outside of the Turkish thesis by means of supporting these organizations as freedom supporters and some regional actors that trying to combat with ISIS. But indeed, we see in the real position of a geography, it also makes more destabilization of the geography. And we see this destabilization process and become more and more regional actors, and it also tries to affect Turkish security concerns. Other side of Syria has been 911 kilometer squares are under threat, and we see now the Turkish troops are organizing to again an operation towards the northern side of Syria. And this is why the UN or such the EU, some institutions sometimes support these actors. But we are alone, but indeed in a realistic mannerism, we should focus and defeat these terrorists by using our national forces.
Why we are alone, Ömer?
Oh, that's a good question, but let me add something before I answer the question. Ferhat Abdishahin is the adoptive son of Abdullah Öcalan, the founding terrorist of the PKK terrorist organization, who's been designated as a terrorist organization
by son, right?
NATO, the EU, and the US. And his name in the PKK was Shahin Cilo, and he is now working under the name of Mazlum Kobane. So this shows us here the double standard. If the adopted son of Osama bin Laden would be in Turkey and would receive delegations, officials from Turkey, the entire world would go crazy. But if it's the PKK who's killing Turkish citizens, then we see here another standard. Yes. And why is Turkey alone? I think here Turkey has also reflect about its own mistakes, but also we have to understand that there is a different perception which is hard to overcome. So we have seen it many times. If there's a terrorist attack in France, it's been seen majorly differently from a terrorist attack in Syria, for example. And this has to be about the self-perception of the industrial states, mainly the Western states. And I don't think that Turkey can overcome this sociological obstacle. And
so do you think things have changed, especially after the failed coup attempt in Turkey, with regards to Interpol's cooperation with Turkey? What do you say?
Yeah, it has changed in this regard because there was a mass accident, a coup attempt, and there was a massive huge number of people who were involved in this coup attempt, which killed over 250 Turkish citizens. Yeah. However, most of them took refuge in Western states, Germany mainly, and the US mainly. And as Turkey wanted to get them back from them to assert a red alert in Interpol, these states prevented, and their efforts led to the cancelling of the red alerts for FETÖ terrorist members. Even Adil Öksöz, who is the main operational leader of the coup attempt, is now somewhere in Europe. Last time we know, he was in Germany.
Yeah. So, what happens if Turkey decides cooperate less with Interpol, and what kind of an impact it would have on the organization's ability to track criminals, since Turkey is on a very strategic location?
Yes, and we saw some operations of the Turkish intelligence services, and we got some FETÖ and other terrorist organizers from different countries, I think such
Kosovo?
nearly, yes, and more than 38 countries Turkey captured and these terrorists and came to the homeland. And we can do alone, but if these organizations tries to become more and sound judgments being in the institutional body, I mean they are now acting in a hierarchy, and this is why this hierarchical and hegemonic model becomes more and more Western-centric. And Turkey and the other regional actors such Russia, such Iran, and the other countries needs to make more cooperation in these organizations and mostly become an effective getting some results about the regional concerns. And we see in the Astana processes like this, in the Syrian issue, Russia, Turkey, and Iran got collaborated and then get the result becoming in the future of the Syrian issue.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk. Appreciate it a lot. When it comes to trading with the world's largest economies, Turkey has seen steady growth over the past few years. Tens of billions of dollars in trade have become the norm with countries like the US, China, and across the EU. But one of the world's largest and fastest growing economies, India, hasn't broken into that top tier with Turkish businesses just yet. But according to our Ömer Kaplan, that could be about to change.
India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. And within a decade, it will be home to the most people. With a population of 1.3 billion, even a modest trade relationship with India translates into big business. According to the latest figures from Turkey's foreign ministry, the trade volume between Turkey and India stood at over $8 billion in 2018. Most of that trade involved Indian goods and services being exported to Turkey, and not the other way around. In 2018, Turkey saw a $6 billion trade deficit with India, a gap Ankara is looking to narrow. Turkey says it has aims to increase bilateral trade to $10 billion by 2020. It's a modest goal given how much Turkey trades with the largest economies in the world. And that's what's giving Turkish businesses hope that they can replicate Turkey's largest trade ties with the world's biggest economies in India as well. Canan Çelebioglu, who heads the Turkey-India Council at the Foreign Economic Relations Board of Turkey, says that the two countries naturally complement each other when it comes to trade.
I believe Turkey also has developed in some of the areas much better than India, so we can offer some know-how, some product very easily to Indian market. And of course, the Indian market also can offer some, as you know, some computer science issues, and also they are very developed in the medicine production industry.
One area that is promising is tourism. Turkey, long a favored destination for India's rich, could soon draw the country's growing middle class.
The growth could come from tourism, especially incoming tourists from India to Turkey. It's already started actually with some weddings.
Earlier this year, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan met Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Japan. The two leaders discussed bilateral trade, amongst other issues. After the meeting, Prime Minister Modi praised Turkey as a valued friend and said that strategies to further ties were being hashed out. Economic and cultural ties between the two countries are centuries old, and since diplomatic relations were formally established in 1948, cooperation has grown, paving the way for further business. Ömer Kaplan, Straight Talk.
And joining me now is Sanjay Bhattacharya, who is the Indian ambassador to Turkey. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for joining me on Straight Talk. It's good to have you here.
Delighted to be here.
Thank you. A Turkish senior lawmaker and you have also said that Turkey and India are natural allies in the 21st century. What connections and bonds make the two countries natural allies? Where does that come from?
So it's really a very old partnership. We are civilizational partners. And in the first part of the 20th century, there were a number of exchanges that consolidated this bond between India and Turkey. When you had the Balkan Wars, there was a medical mission that came from India. 22 doctors and assistants who came from Lucknow in Uttar Pradesh. And they came to Istanbul and they set up two camps, one in Ömerli and one in Çanakkale. The mission was led by Dr. M.A. Ansari, whose grandnephew, Hamid Ansari, became the Indian vice president and visited Turkey. A second one that comes to mind from that time was when Turkey was engaged in its nationalist movement. There was a great deal of empathy in India for that movement. And Mahatma Gandhi, who everybody knows, actually rallied the Indians together, Indians of all communities, and they contributed to the Turkish nationalist movement cause. £128,000 were raised and sent to Ataturk. He used some of that for the war effort, and the rest of it he put into the capital of Ishbank. So our connections are really very, very deep. I think the 21st century provides an entirely new framework for our partnership, because the 21st century is a time when both India and Turkey have had fantastic growth, social transformation. We are leaders in our region and have the ability to lead global affairs. And therefore, my Prime Minister says that's what makes us the natural partners of the 21st century.
So, but Turkey's trade with India stood at a modest $8 billion in 2018, and this trade is in favor of India when we take a look at it. Which areas could the two countries, you think, further develop to expand that number and maybe balance it a bit?
I would say that 8 billion is not so modest, because that makes India Turkey's 10th largest trading partner. We had set a target of $10 billion when Prime Minister Modi and President Erdogan met in 2017, and the target was set for 2020. But the way we are going, we should be able to reach that target this year, because last year we grew at 22%. And once we reach that target, which was set by our leaders, I am firmly of the opinion that we should look for a more ambitious target, something like doubling within the next 5 years. We don't have an FTA.
How do you plan to do that?
Yeah,
In
so we
which
don't have an
sectors, for
FTA, but we commissioned a study which has now come to the consensus that the two nations should negotiate an FTA. And when Trade Minister Rosan Pekcan was in India last December, they talked about it, and I hope that when we have the next meeting of the Joint Commission, we will announce the negotiations. And that will give a huge boost to the trade relations between our two countries. But I think when we look at our economic relations, we should look at it in conjunction with the investments. And that's another story that we shouldn't lose track of, because Turkey has had fantastic growth over the last 30 odd years, as has India. Today, we are the fastest growing economy. Today, Indian investments in Turkey are in the range of about $500 million in chemicals, automobiles, farm equipment, pharmaceuticals, textiles. And similarly, there are Turkish companies which are engaged in this huge Make in India project. So we have glass, we have white goods, we have construction sector, which is very active, logistics, and there is so much more that we can do. And I think the dialogue that is on between the business houses on both sides shows us that the direction.
But do you agree that the current status falls short of the potential of trade between the two countries?
I'm a diplomat. I always believe we should do much more. And I think that's exactly what I think we are doing. We are saying that in the next 5 years, we should double our trade. We are saying that in the next few years, we should quadruple the level of investments on each side. The opportunities are huge.
So you're in touch with businessmen
on
both parties, right?
We have a joint business council, which is between the business chambers. We have regular meetings at the ministerial and official levels. And I'm very, very happy with the momentum that is there in our bilateral relations.
Let's talk about a bit of politics. One of President Erdogan's most popular slogans is that the world is bigger than five, meaning that the United Nations Security Council, with its 5 permanent members, falls short of meeting or tackling today's challenges the world is facing now. So I know that India has also been critical of that system. Do you believe there's a room for the two countries to cooperate on reforming the United Nations, or is this too ambitious?
We have a great understanding on this particular issue. We both recognize that the United Nations, of which we are both members, has played a very critical role in peace and development. But at the same time, we also recognize that it has not been able to fully address the aspirations of the developing world. And more importantly, it has not adjusted to the enormous changes that have taken place in the global systems ever since the end of the Second World War. And therefore, there is a need for reform. Recently, as you are aware, the United Nations Secretary General had announced some internal changes in the way the UN functions, in the way it relates to host governments. And I think those changes were very welcome. They're extremely important, they're very welcome, but we need to take it further. And I think central to the other reforms that are necessary is that there has to be greater democracy in decision making. And I think when President Erdogan says the world is greater than one, that is what he's referring to. That's very central to what we do.
So you say the decision-making mechanism is not democratic?
Not entirely, because we know what the UN Security Council is. We also think that there has to be a greater sense of responsibility in responding to peacekeeping demands, and also a greater ability in responding to the development aspirations. So democracy combined with responsibility and ability. And in this, we sincerely believe that all member countries must be taken on as entire responsible members of the United Nations. We have had a number of suggestions, and I don't see the day too far away when India and Turkey can play a very dominant role and become global leaders in this particular agenda.
How are you planning to do that?
We have ongoing discussions at the UN. As you know, it's a body where we have had very close collaboration on a number of issues. Some of it will have to happen within the UN, and a lot of it happens in the various other bodies. For instance, in the WTO, where we talk about trade, in the UNFCCC, where we talk about climate change, or the FATF, for instance, where we talk about counterterrorism.
Okay. So Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, he spoke at the 11th Ambassadors Conference and announced a new Asia initiative. It is called Asia Anew. If you like, let's listen to what he said and we'll continue to talk.
Asya dünyanın ekonomik merkezi haline gelmektedir.
Asia is becoming the economic center of the world. The international community vies for greater involvement in Asia. Turkey has deep roots in this most dynamic region of the world. Being Asian and in Asia is as important as being European and in Europe for us.
So he said being Asian in Asia is as important as being European in Europe for us. That's what the Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu says. What do you make of that? How will this new initiative affect Turkey-India relations in the coming future?
We've seen an increasing thrust towards Asian countries. There was the set of priority countries that the Trade Ministry had announced last year, and India, as you know, was one of them. It really recognizes the enormous changes, the developments that have taken place in the Far East and in Southeast Asia and in South Asia in particular. I mentioned earlier that India today is the fastest growing economy, and this is a natural corollary that when Turkey looks for partners in the world today, it has to look for partners that have weight, and India has weight.
So, Mr. Ambassador, we all know that Kashmir's autonomy has been revoked after 7 decades, and this caused great concern on international community as well as Turkey. Turkey also expressed its concern about the latest. What do you make of that? What would you say?
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in the international media because they haven't understood what the changes are. What has happened is that the government of India has made certain provisions of the Article 370 non-operational and has introduced a new bill for the reorganization of the state of Jammu and Kashmir to create 2 union territories, one of Ladakh and one of Jammu and Kashmir. These are administrative measures for having better administrative convenience, governance, to bring about greater development and provide security. And this is something that is a purely internal procedure in accordance with the Indian Constitution. So I find it very interesting that there are people who think that this has wider ramifications idea.
So do you believe could Turkey possibly play a mediating role if the parties agreed just to diffuse tensions in the region?
I think we have not got mediation on the table. Okay. We have never asked any country to play a mediatory role. The tensions that are there in the region are because of the export of terrorism, cross-border terrorism, from another country.
All right, Mr. Ambassador, thank you for joining me on Straight Talk. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you very much.
And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ayşe Süberker. If you've got any comments, do share them with us on Twitter with the hashtag Straight Talk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.